Thank you for joining us again on yesterday's memories. Hope you've been enjoying the show because you hear things here that you may not hear anywhere else, and you can only watch this program on Channel 7 on Beam TV East Alabama Cable. But and I say you'll hear some things here because I was in business for years and years and years, and had photos on display and that sort of thing, and people shopping with me. I was just telling Steve Albert about how, that people would tell me different stories about different things that lived it. So you're going to see some of that today. And today we're going to talk about, seems like all the pictures I had on display, what people from this area, from Phenix City, that actually grew up here and actually really may not have grown up here, had heard about the Idlewild Park. And that was the locals' place to go. Just imagine a place, living a place that you can just go out any day that you want to, every day except Christmas, year round, and go bowling. We had bowling, skating, oh gosh, just rides, merry-go-round, swimming, all that stuff. So we're going to talk about that today. And originally, Roy Martin, who owned Martin Theater, developed Idlewild Park. Roy Martin loved Phenix City. He hangared his plane over here. Matter of fact, he built an airport. And we have young people in this city that don't ever know we had an airport. We're going to talk about that a little bit today, and don't know we had a depot. We won't discuss that today, but in one future episode we will. But that's just, I love trying to educate young people and tell them about our city. But Roy Martin was a real estate developer, actually, and he owned all of those properties, which is now Idlewild Drive. Matter of fact, that was part of the Idlewild Park property when it was sold. But he was a pilot. He had his own plane, and he had a pilot, but a lot of times he was a licensed pilot. He could fly the plane, but he was killed in 1947 in Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana. And so in 1949, his two sons, they was more interested in the theater business and running Idlewild Park. As I say, this was owned by Roy Martin. And he used to just love, I've heard stories of why he would just love and just to go to the park. And as I say, he owned it. He would mingle with the vendors and others there that had stands and whatever at the park. And he just loved it. But then the two boys in 1949 offered it to Phenix City if they would buy it. And it was attraction. Oh gosh, the military personnel, any military personnel that was here in say the 40s or in the 50s, even probably the early 60s and so forth, could tell you about the Idlewild Park because it was a local attraction that so many, Columbus and Phenix City and surrounding areas went to. But as I say, Roy Martin was killed in 1947. Well, here we come up to 1949. His two sons, approached the mayor, Cobb. Homer Cobb was mayor of Phenix City at that time, and the council about perhaps buying the Idlewild Park. And so negotiations for the sale were completed in 1949. An hour and a half meeting was held at City Hall. The meeting had actually been scheduled for Thursday, but that was Thanksgiving Day. So a call meeting was held on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. Now listen to this. The Idlewild Park, the property comprised of approximately 237 acres, which had been appraised at that time, 1949, had been appraised at $2,600,000. But it was purchased actually for less, $25,000 less than the original price that they was going to sell it to the Phenix City for. The set price was $250,000. Well, where does Phenix City get $250,000? That was a lot of money in 1949. But think about it, it's being worth and praised value of $2,600,000. So Mayor Cobb went to Washington, D.C. to try to borrow the money, and a loan was approved for $200,000, only a week before the final price, before the final purchase. And then the city had originally asked for $250,000. But the bond rating of Phenix City at that time wouldn't be approved for $250,000. So Mayor Homer D. Cobb made the offer in the form of a motion, seconded by Commissioner J.D. Harris. The mission was passed without a dissenting vote to buy it for $250,000. All right, now Mayor Cobb, after negotiations had been completed, told the theater officials at Martin Theater, the Sons, that it had been planned to change the name of Idlewild Park to Martin's Park in memory of the founder. He also stated that they planned to erect a memorial staff in the park, would be in grateful appreciation for what Mr. Martin did for Phenix City. The property site included the Idlewild Park property and the adjacent property, 20 residences. 20 residences. Now remember I said Mr. Martin was a real estate developer. So that included 20 residences, Martin Stadium, which had already been built, the $25,000 baseball park, the 16-acre lake, and that included boating facilities, and a swimming pool, rides, concessions, and a 2,300-foot-long airport, valued at $150,000 in 1949 at the time of the purchase. The Martin Stadium was built in 1947 at a cost of $75,000 because before 1947, Central, our only high school, even today, played behind the old high school, the original Central on 14th Street, played in the back. And we'll be talking about that in a later episode where there was a fence erected. So Mayor Cobb, he goes to Washington and he tries to borrow $250,000. Well, they wouldn't loan the city $250,000 because of our bond rating at that time. So we finally decided on a price from the Martin Group of $225,000. So everything I've just read to you that was bought in 1949 by the city of Phenix City for $225,000. The airport, the park, and everything else. And here, let me just show you, this is an original poster of the early 50s where the Idlewild Park, had bowling, ladies' night, Monday and Wednesday, 12 center lane, regular 40 center lane. Had roller skating, and ladies' night, Tuesdays and Thursdays, with skates was free. All right, then you had arcade, you had a shooting gallery, you had archery, you had free fishing, a free zoo, and then a short order cafe. And then you had dancing there at the Soda Pop nightclub, they call it. And what they would do there is put cornmeal on the floor where it wouldn't be slippery and that sort of thing. But, all right, so we're at the park now, so we're fixing to go in. The old Idlewild Park, it's just hard to imagine. And you see, all we have now as a city is photos because it's like everything else. It's gone. And we have our memories, and that's why I love to call this show Yesterday's Memories, because that's what we have. All right, the first photo we're going to have is the stadium, the Martin Stadium, the old football stadium. There again, it was built in 1947, and so Central played their home games there and so forth. But as you can see in this photo, where people lived in the stadium. Actually, there was apartments in there, I've been to many ball games whenever they were stuff hanging out on the line. I mean, clothes actually hanging out on the line. Now we call it Garrett Harrison, and him about a couple of years ago, the newspaper called me and asked me how they got the name of that Garrett Stadium. Well, when the name was changed, Tommy Garrett had been a legendary football coach at Central. He came back in the 40s, and then he was just legendary there, And then Harrison was Leo Harrison at South Girard. He was an athletic director, football coach, and so forth at South Girard High School, for a long period of time. So that's how we got the name Garrett Harrison Stadium. I still call it Martin Stadium, but that's me. I'm old, and my memories still go back to Martin Stadium. But inside the stadium, we had things there like when you went in the stadium, the old stadium, the bleachers was wood, but you had it was like a track you could go around between the bleachers, and then there was a fence, and then there was a track that went around. And homecoming queens, for instance, there you had when you had homecoming at the ball game, the different queens or whatever, the beauty contestants would ride around there. We also had track. That's where Central's track team met. We had midget car races. And you can see in this picture here where we had motorcycle races there. And let me just say one thing. This guy here, his name is Cecil Holland. And you've probably heard of Holland Mansion at the foot of Sumble Hill. We'll talk about that at a later show, but this is Cecil Holland. Cecil Holland moved there in the early 60s and put a sign in the yard, Holland Mansion. So now it's known by many locals as the Holland Mansion. That's what it's called. It's a landmark that you can point out if you. It's right down from Holland Mansion or whatever the case may be. Warren Williams actually built that house in 1900, and we'll talk about that at a later show. But that's where they was having motorcycles. See, the good old days where they was having motorcycle races around the stadium. But you know what people really loved is the swimming pool. I mean, on a hot day, there was nothing like jumping in that swimming pool. As a matter of fact, we've all got memories of our childhood. And Steve and I were talking earlier this morning about Dialogue Park and what we used to do. And every Saturday, I would go to the Palace Theater. But every Sunday after church, I'd start, had this friend named Mule Face Mansell. Mule Face was his nickname. We're going to talk about that later show about some different people in Phenix City, and he's included. But Mule Face and I would start walking up Summer Road with our thumbs out. Well, we never made it to the park walking. In those days, somebody all the way up Summer Road, people would be hitchhiking, going to the park, and people would stop and, you going to the park? Yeah, well, jump in the back, back of the pickup or whatever the case may be. In those days, people would pick you up. Now, in this photo here is a swimming pool, and you can see on one end there, it was almost like we had our own beach. You had sand over here where people could get out of the pool and lay and perhaps take a tan or whatever the case may be here. And then the pool had its own water filtration plant there. And then at the other end of the pool, you had a kiddie pool there where maybe moms could take their young kids and so forth and get in the pool at the other end. And oh boy, the famous slides with the three different slides. The big slide, and then you had the diving boards. Had three different diving boards on there, And I mean, people just get in there, and it was just to cool off. But I'm telling you, it was also a place where a lot of people would take their kids in the summer to take swimming lessons. I know my boys, rather than their mom and I teach them how to swim, we went to the park. They had swimming lessons, and that's where they learned to swim. By licensed instructor at Idlewild Park was all every summer. And you can see behind the fence there at the park the little train. We're going to show that in a minute and talk about that. But kids was just having fun and learning to swim, and not only children, adults, anyone that wanted to learn to swim. Every summer they gave lessons on learning how to swim. But boy, I'm telling you, here's another photo, a little better photo of the beach here, or the sand. We call it a beach. That was our own beach, but but just look at the people inside the park, inside just swimming. That was a place where you went to cool off. And of course, when I was growing up, there was other swimming holes like the Long Eddy, right out here, the coldest water in town. Oochie Creek, Britton's Pool, there's all kind of places where you could go. But it seemed like the central place was Idlewild Park. And of course, we always had a lifeguard. This photo here is Bev Bush. And boy, she was a beauty. She was just a real sweet girl. Just as nice could be. And you see how the boys has just flocked around her there, just talking to her. And I don't know who this is. And I was thinking, this young lady here must be the guy that's talking to her. If you can see the expression on her face, maybe his girlfriend or whoever. But she was such a nice lifeguard, just so sweet, would take time to talk to young and old, anybody. She was so nice. Beverly Bush. But then outside the pool, there was as many outside, or probably more outside, looking in than there were in the pool. You can see here probably lonely soldiers from Fort Benning just looking. And they was always a group, clinging to the fence, looking in, wishing they was in that nice, cool water. But this photo here is military personnel from Fort Benning just looking in. And also, here's another photo of people that's gathered outside looking in. But see, there was always a group there, and it seems like the swimming pool was a central place that everybody gathered. You didn't go to the park if you didn't go down and look in the pool, see who was there, and so forth and so on like that. But see, this is perhaps on a Sunday afternoon. Just look at the people there that's passing by. That's looking at the ones in the pool. And of course, always right out beside the pool is where they always park the little train. If you've lived in Phenix City and ever went to the Idlewild Park, you've got to remember the little train. From my understanding, when the park sold equipment off, when it finally closed down, this was sold to the Shriners, I believe, in Dothan, Alabama, for $1,200. Now, I may be wrong. I want to say that, but I have heard that. But this little train, it was used you could rent it for birthday parties, and we're going to show that in a moment. But vacation Bible school is another thing. Parades, Christmas parade, whatever. You would always see the little train and see it says visit the Idlewild Park. And there was a big sign there that said the Idlewild Park, the South's largest amusement park. But sometime later, a little later on, probably in the 70s, I'd say, the park, to renew interest as it was kind of going down and falling in disrepair. At Moon Lake, we had, there's the old boathouse. The top photo is the old boathouse that was up there. It's gone now, but it was up there at the end of the lake, and we had ski shows and other things that people would just come to see, and all this was free. There wasn't a charge. It was free. So people would, and you could park. As a matter of fact, in those days, you could ride around. That's a man-made dam at the other end, down by the Art Center today, right across from it. And in those days, you could ride around the park. I mean, you had to go on Idlewild Park Drive up here, but you could ride on down there. I spent many nights, just all night long, just fishing. Me and some friends of mine, fishing all night long, and just chatting and talking, sitting under the old pine trees over there. But that was a man-made dam, and you could ride around all the way around then. And you see, this was up on the hill. This is 1944. This little house was on the hill between where the Art Center is today and the Community Center, on the hill there, right across from Roy Martin Center, Community Center over there. And this little house sat right in the middle. And they was picnic tables around and so forth and so on. But this is the BN Band playing, Billy Nichols Band, 1944. And it looks like a young boy and a girl dancing that perhaps had on a swimming suit, I believe. And there was many over here that would walk down, still had the swimming suit on, would walk down and would hear the music playing, and they would just be performing out there. Billy Nichols Band. Now that's somebody that loved these old pictures. Billy Nichols, he was a very dear friend of mine. At one time, he was director a little later on of the Parks and Recreation. Great guy. And of course, here we have the skating rink. Oh my gosh. I bet you I've had a dozen people to tell me that this gentleman right here, he said, that was me. I've had at least a dozen guys tell me, that was me, back in the 50s. The skating rink. Oh my gosh, my gosh. I'm telling you, that's another thing. It didn't cost anything to get in. Everything was free. You may not have money to go swimming, but like these pictures I just showed you, people would stand at the fence and watch people as they swam. Same with the skating. The skating ring was, as you got off the bus there and went in, and as a matter of fact, the buses ran every 20 minutes to the park, every 20 minutes. And I remember, as I said a while ago, I would go on Sunday, and the few dollars I'd have, I'd always spend on whatever at the park. And perhaps I wouldn't have any money, and the park closed at 11 o'clock every night. And the bus driver, the last bus, as you caught the bus, perhaps in Columbus, on Broad, or wherever, it'd say the Idlewild Park. And the bus driver would go down to the skating ring and say they was 15 more minutes before the last bus left. And he would watch them skate, and he'd say, the bus leaves in 15 minutes. Excuse me. All right, and a few minutes later, he'd say, the bus is leaving in 10 minutes. And then he'd say, the bus is leaving in 5 minutes. Well, he'd have his door to his bus closed. And I remember an old mule face, and I walked up to him and said, we don't have any money. He said, well, I tell you, when you get on the bus, act like you put some money in the corn box. We did. And so that was our way back home that night. But it would have been bad, even in those days, to walk from Idlewild Park down to by Booth's Drugstore where we lived at that point. But somebody would have picked us up, and that's the way it was in those days. And of course, the skating ring, and also the bowling alley. Now here, the great thing about the bowling alley, we had our own bowling alley, and this is you walked in the bowling alley, and this is probably the last thing that was tore down by the city was a bowling alley. The city had allowed the roof to cave in. As a matter of fact, they stored parade decorations, Christmas decorations or whatever in there, just anything and everything. And so the building fell in disrepair. But this photo here, as you would walk into the skating ring, here was a little cafe over here where you could buy whatever, a sandwich of some kind. And you could sit here. Here's a little chairs up here where you could sit there and watch people bowl. Well, it wasn't automatic bowling. They had what they call pin boys back there. And you see in this photo here, it's got the shot that's showing straight down where the boys would sit back in. And nothing was automatic in those days. So as you throwed the balls back, I had a very good friend, Jerry Tolson, that worked up there, and I went to see him, and I would walk down this side here where there wasn't a lane and walk back where the pin boys was. And boy, it was noisy back there with those balls coming in. And the boys would hold their legs up as people was bowling. And a lot of times it was military personnel, and usually I remember when I was up there that day with him, it must have been an officer that was bowling, because the last ball that came down, he took a $20 bill in the hole where he had put his finger and just shoved it down to Jerry, and there was a $20. You know, he probably didn't make that all week from the bowling alley. And so those young boys usually relied on tips as well as a small salary. But you know, it's hard to get across to younger people and anybody, even my grandkids. I told them that Phoenix City used to have a zoo. Well, where was it? I said it was at Idlewild Park. And we had animals up there. We even had a lion. This is Bonzo the lion. And where they kept the food to feed the animals was under the zoo side of the stadium, of Martin Stadium. Up under the bleachers, that's where they stored the feed and the food to feed these animals. That's Bonzo. You can see, I assume this is a veterinarian working on Bonzo. I hope they have him sedated. The lion was so old that he didn't roar, he just sort of coughed. Yeah, that's how old he was. But anyhow, the door's open. I'm sure he's sedated because he has two young boys as well as somebody else looking in. But he's perhaps giving him some kind of medication of some kind. But that was Bonzo. All right, now, of course, to have a zoo, you got to have a zookeeper, somebody in charge. And this is Mr. O.C. Smith. Now, that's a zookeeper. And this is an 80-pound snapping turtle in this photo here that was caught in the Chattahoochee River right down below the Idlewild Park. 80 pounds, look at that. 80-pound snapping turtle. And that's Mr. O.C. Smith. And one thing I remember about him, he was a real heavy, a large man, but he drove a little Isetta car. And he always parked it down sort of by the lake. But Isetta was one of those little cars, he was the only one that could fit in. As a matter of fact, it just had one seat, but it was one of those cars where you open up the front of the car. And that's what I remember about Mr. Smith. But he walked so slow, but he was a good man. And he really cared for those animals. He really honestly did. And of course, this was the next photo is the star of the attraction. This is old Joe. This is the bear. We had a bear. That was Joe. And you can see Joe here, a little girl is leaning over the bar here, feeding Joe a Coca-Cola. Joe would eat anything, drink anything that you throw to him. As a matter of fact, you know, when you get grown and you think about some things that you did as perhaps as a young person, you know, it just kind of really bothers you. And I remember one day I was up there and all of a sudden there's Mew Face and he pulls these bottle of Alka-Seltzer out. Well, in those days, Alka-Seltzer came 25 in a little tube, like 25 in there. And so Mew Face would throw an Alka-Seltzer, and Joe, of course, would catch it. And after Joe swallowed about 25 Alka-Seltzers, and old Joe, the bear, just went over and just laid down. Well, you know, you think about that. The gang of the boys that was with us then thought it was funny. But you know, you get grown, you have to do a lot of reflecting, a lot of repenting. And that's one thing I wish I'd have spoke up. But old Joe, after they closed the zoo and sold off all the animals, donated them, whatever, nobody wanted Joe because Joe was so old. And there again, Joe would eat anything. He was such a pet, and so forth. So the city put a small cage up at the Lakewood Park, and that's where Joe died of old age, no doubt, and loneliness, because he missed all the crowds that came, because there was always constantly a crowd at the park, at the zoo, and so forth. And all of these animals, today you couldn't have conditions like it was there. I remember, for instance, the zoo, up at the zoo, there was probably about 6 deers in a little place no bigger than probably a bedroom. But there again, you know, we had, and I remember we had a leopard, just had an alligator, and just all kind of animals there at the zoo. But it was something that was really, you know, when you had guests and company coming from out of town, you could take them open year round, as I say. But you know, I mentioned a while ago about having about the little train. You could rent it for birthday parties, and it was in parades and other things. Now this is a party of all parties that I'm going to show you right now. This is Mr. and Miss Childs on Idlewild Park Grocery. It was right up on Sumble Road, right now where the stadium is, but a little below it, probably where the farm was set up on different days to sell produce out there. But it was Idlewild Park Grocery. And the little Childs girl here, this was a birthday party she had. And of course the train, they rented the train to take the kids around and so forth like that. But him, we got old Dumbo, and that's what they called him. Unofficially, I guess he never really had a name. But this is her. This is not on the birthday day, but this is Elephant from the Idlewild Park. Now, Mrs. Childs, when she was living, told me this story about as I said, they owned and ran the Idlewild Park Grocery. But this elephant would walk up from the park, would open the front door of their store with a snout there, and they would give him, his favorite was a Snicker bar. They would give him candy. And this elephant would eat his candy bar and walk back down to the zoo. Now, where else in the world are you going to live in a city that you can see? Now, just imagine this, seeing an elephant walking down the street like that. But this elephant they use for different things, and you can see there where the trainer had his rein there. But he, in a lot of times, he wouldn't leave before the little Childs girl rode him. I mean, one thing I can say about a picture, it's history, like I like to say, it's history frozen in time. And so when you got a picture, you got history just frozen. Now this photo here was a little below, it was on the Sumble Road exit and entrance to the Idlewild Park. You can see the big bowling pins there. There was an entrance. And then you had pony rides. And then people, the little Shetland ponies, the kids could ride and so forth. Went around in a circle. And you could rent horses there. They boarded 42 horses at this facility. And you could rent them. As a matter of fact, not only that, but I remember going on a midnight ride, a special occasion, where we rode horses back behind the old airport, where the art center is today, back through the woods. It was a guided tour and things like that. So as I say, there was something for everybody. Now this photo here is more or less like I started off talking about the park where we had the football stadium with the where they had the motorcycle races and so forth back in. You had the baseball field, and of course this is also in the middle of the football field. You had the baseball stadium. You had the whole park here. And then you had a building down here where they had dancing, usually on Friday and Saturday nights, and it was also a restaurant here. And then over here was the boating facilities and so forth, where you could rent boats. And in my lifetime, I remember both of these was standing. Of course, they're all gone now, and really, I went by that the other day, and really about the only thing left that reminds me of when I was a boy is where you waited on the bus, the concrete where you sat and waited on the bus and so forth like that. And actually, one of those is gone. There was two sections divided by a giant door where you walked through. And as you walked through that door, if you got on the bus, I remember there was these mirrors on the side where it showed you looking real heavy and perhaps really fat or whatever. You walk to the next mirror, you look like olive oil, on Popeye. I mean, it made you real skinny. In other words, they was just like the house of mirrors at the fair, that sort of thing. I mean, it was just phenomenal. And all of this was free. And I usually spend my money on the vending machines where you could buy Hollywood stars, like Roy Rogers and Hopalong Cassidy, cards like that. And I used to have a thick collection of those things like that. And now, you can still get them, but you go on eBay, they're not free or anywhere else like that. But another thing that became a family tradition, even after the park was kind of dwindling down and falling in disrepair and everything. See, they used to have, before we had an amphitheater, everything was at the Idlewild Park. I mean, all activities for the family was there. And then holidays, like, for instance, July the 4th especially, and then Labor Day. When I was a young boy, we used to didn't start back to school till usually the day after Labor Day. But we always had fireworks at the park. Now here we having fireworks at the park. You see, it was usually on the hill up there, coming down. Over here would be Roy Martin Center, coming down this hill here. Or we would have them on the dam shooting up. But on Labor Day, on Labor Day, July the 4th, just look at the people. I mean, it was an annual thing where you really, in other words, all your relatives would eat out, grill out, cook out, whatever you did on July the 4th. And we would get ready, and usually along about 5:30, 6 o'clock, we'd go to the park, because at sundown, you'd get a nice place. You'd take your lawn chairs up there, because at sundown, the giant firework display. Sort of like it's at the amphitheater now. But at those days, it was at Idlewild Park. Here's another photo. You can see the fireworks going off there. Primarily the same thing. It's just a different shot. And that's July the 4th, 1955. But just look at the cars and the people, and of course this is just showing a little bit, but people's parked everywhere you can park there. I mean, it was just something all the time. Now this photo here is a picture of the Idlewild Park, Moon Lake, and then there was a building I was telling you about, the dance, the restaurant. It was still part of the park, and people rented this out and had a restaurant there, and it's a restaurant and a dance hall and so forth. This is a water filtration plant. Remember I said that the lake filtered their own water and so forth. And I remember this little place here was like a little dairy bar. I remember there was a very short woman lived there, and she was so, or worked there rather, and she was so sweet. But that's a little dairy bar where you could buy a milkshake and so forth. But later on, they put Ferris wheels in, other things. But then, as I say, the city bought the park in 1949. Well, it takes upkeep. Now, the city had a Parks and Recreation director, had a Parks and Recreation committee, and I've always said the best committee is a committee of 3 with 2 absent. That makes the best committee, in my opinion, a lot of times, not on all cases. But then the park in the 70s really started going down. You know, you got to keep update on a house, you got to be painting, other things. And so the park really hadn't had money pumped into it and so forth. So as you can see in this next photo here, where the park, see here's the midway, where the park really is falling in disrepair. Here's a merry-go-round over here. And then right back here, you can't see it in this photo, but it was right behind the merry-go-round, the wall where later on, after the merry-go-round was gone and the park, all this was gone, an artist painted a mural up there. And then what happens? The city comes along and hides this mural and putting a community center up there, you know. And if you go up there today, and let me tell you something, there's natural springs running all under this property. If you go up there today and stand out in front of right here would be where the community center is. No noise, and if you get real quiet and you walk around, you can hear actually water running. I've done it. As a matter of fact, the lake is spring fed. It was actually by Roy Martin dug out and made bigger, but that's a natural spring running all the way down to 5th Avenue. When I was on the council, I went down to Joe Fletcher lived on 5th Avenue, a very dear friend of mine, and he was having problems, and that spring runs all the way down through 5th Avenue down to the river. So there's many of natural springs run down through there. As a matter of fact, just this past week, I just happened to be riding by the old playground. And I know when our boys was little, my wife and I and her sister and so forth, a lot of Sunday afternoons, we would go up to the playground at Idlehour Park. And I remember there was the old slide, the giant slide was in such disrepair. But since then, the city has taken that down. At one time, there was a goldfish pond up there. I remember when I was young, when these pictures was taken, and I'm talking about that. But the park had really fallen in disrepair, and they tried to revitalize it by having different things up there. You can see in this photo where it's in the 70s, where the city, the Parks and Recreation Department, had different vendors, local vendors. They even started having yard sales up there to try to generate traffic and people to come. You can see in this photo here where the Ferris wheels here. Of course, the old restaurant's gone. The old boathouse down here is gone, and most of this is gone. The little dairy bar is gone, and right here would have been the merry-go-round. It's gone. But the city was trying to get up traffic to revitalize the park. But, you know, one thing, the way I love history, it just breaks my heart to see we've torn down everything. We have really, our city has just torn down everything. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I love Phenix City. I raised, my wife and I have raised 3 boys here. But see, they've missed this because it was torn down. And so, it's like, I don't know, but there again, we've talked about Roy Martin being a pilot. And here's the old airport. Now, if you recognize this picture here, it is still standing. That today is the Phoenix Art Council. It used to be the airport terminal building. If you went in there and could look out, there's a giant picture window, what I call it, a big giant window, probably about an 8x8 back at the back, where you could see the planes. You can see the planes here. It was never an airport where you jets landed or anything like that, but it was a little commercial airport that took, as I say, Roy Martin had his plane here at the hangar. And the great thing about this was, if you went by that today at the Art Center and looked up, you would see on both sides where you could walk up there. Now, since then, they've blocked it off. As a matter of fact, it had chairs up here where you could sit down and watch the planes come in, take off, and things like that. And of course, it's a hazard nowadays, and it's not used in the airport, so naturally they blocked this off. As a matter of fact, the top of the building don't even look like it did then. The hangar's gone. As you can see here in this photo, you see all of these trailers. This is where the people that run the rides from the up at the park. A lot of them was from Florida or whatever, that would come up during different times of the year and run the different rides and so forth like that, just like people that work at a circus or a fair or something like that. But this is 1954. You see the runway there. Now, up today, that would be the tennis courts up here today. And of course, the runway naturally is not here anymore. This is the only building that's standing, the old terminal building, which is Art Center today. This was torn down some years ago. But, what gets me a lot of times, I'll tell young people, I said, they asked me, I said, you mean we had an airport? Phoenix City had an airport? I said, yeah, you know where it was? I said, no. I said, have you ever heard of Airport Road or Airport Drive? Yeah, well, that's where the airport was. And this here is a little different photo of the airport. There's the hangar building. There's the terminal. Here's the runway. Now, here's some planes out here. There again, some of the circus, or not circus, but the people that worked at the, that run the ride and different things up at the park, where they park their trailers and things like that. And then here was a dam where you could ride across it. It was just a road. And then here was Moon Lake. Well, you can see in this photo here, this is in the late 40s. There's no houses over here. There's no houses over here on Idlehour Drive. You see this? This is completely no houses on Idlehour Drive. Now, this was right before Phoenix City bought the property. You remember I said to begin with that Phoenix City bought 20 residential property lots that had already been surveyed over here when the city bought the entire property over here. And as I said a while ago, you remember during the negotiations I had said that Mayor Homer D. Cobb had told the Sons that in appreciation of everything that Roy Martin did for Phoenix City, that they was going to change the name to Martin Park. And also erect a bust to him of Roy Martin. Well, the name was never changed to Martin Park. And I just really believe it should never be changed. Roy Martin is the one that started Idlehour Park and called it Idlehour Park. That was his baby. That was his creation. But when I was on a city council, I had brought this to the attention of the council that we never paid homage to Roy Martin. The city, our mayor at that time, had made a promise to erect a bust of Roy Martin and also to erect it in the park. And so the bus had been made for years and years and years, and it was owned by the family, and so it was in custody of the family. So we got in touch with the family, and they said they still had it. So today, when we dedicated the building up at Idlewild Park Community Center, that bust of Roy Martin is in there today. As a matter of fact, we've named part of the building that, and then the other part of the building, the Max Wilkes, Fellowship Hall. But I think, after 50 years, a promise is made was finally a promise is kept. But there again, we had an airport, and this is the airport terminal when it was an airport, Phenix City Airport. As I said, today it's the Phenix City Art Council. But that's the, as far as I know, is the only known picture of that. I gave several pictures of the airport to the Art Council. They have them on display up there inside the building. But this is the Phenix City Airport. There again, you can walk up and see the planes take in and take off. But, the picture I'm fixing to show you now just really breaks my heart. And it's probably the saddest picture that I have, because it was the last thing, even after the park had been closed down, even after the merry-go-round had been sold off. The doors to the bowling alley were locked. The skating ring and all of that entire building had been gone. The swimming pool still stands. And it basically was more or less for swimming lessons during the summer, and you could go swimming during the summer. But this photo here is them filling in the pool, closing it off. And that's probably the saddest photo that I have, in my opinion, for me, because of the memories that I have of the beloved Idlewild Park. I mean, that was a place where we could go year-round, and everybody that lived in Phenix City and through the years that the park was open has fond memories. All different, but all fond memories of the Idlewild Park. Appreciate you tuning in today, and just remember that you won't hear this on any other station but Channel 7, Beam Cable TV. And thank you for tuning in, and see you later.